Okay, after a pretty long gap, we now move on to our next poet, uh, Lord Byron. If you have gone through the introduction given here in the book, you'd find that Byron was quite a controversial figure, and also became quite a raging success, quite popular because of course, scandal also brings along uh, a lot of uh, a lot of press, a lot of publicity, and so that is one thing that is there about Byron, and probably uh, uh, quite a different romantic poet as opposed to the ones that we have already read in our syllabus, as in that you would not find his poetry, particularly the works that we have in our syllabus. Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. The other work he is very famous for is Don Juan or Don Juan, whichever way you pronounce it, Donjaun. Uh, uh, he's different from quite, uh, I mean, most of the other romantic poets in the sense that you will not find his poems that uh, densely philosophical and uh, uh, I mean, they're not propounding any theory of the imagination or some other ideas of the sublime, or although he's using these ideas, but he's not positing any big theories as such. For example, you'll find in Wordsworth or say Coleridge or Shelley, for that matter, or negative capability in Yeats and all of that. However, of course, you can go through the introduction, you'll find the background in which he was writing. We'll come to that when we'll talk about the poem proper. Uh, Also, one thing that you'll find unique to Byron's poetry, which is there in our syllabus particularly, is how uh, descriptive it is, how much it invests in the idea of a narrative. So it runs almost like a long story, because this one is written in that uh, medieval romance tradition. It is not romantic, that romance. Uh, the idea of a romance is that a knight goes, Knight, a knight goes on a long journey where he encounters various incidents, hurdles, seductions, temptations, various sins. I mean, he can commit, uh, or rather, he has to surmount or overpower certain temptations so that he does not sin, and uh, so on and so forth. Probably not, the idea of sin is not that central as much as the idea of adventure, which is crucial to a romance. Uh, Plus, you would find a lot of, in a sense, uh, uh, skirmishes, short battles, small battles that happen on a knight's journey. And you would also find affairs along the way with, I mean, uh, uh, with the charming women that the knight would encounter, and so this is a very feudal uh, genre in particular, the chivalric romance or the medieval romance. Uh, However, in the title itself, you'll also find uh, it is the pilgrimage, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. So, the first note given in your book, page 405, uh, would give you an extensive insight into what the poem is about, why that idea of the child, the young nobleman, gentleman, who is going on a journey, uh, a medieval romance kind of a journey. Uh, and it is titled a pilgrimage, but however, it is not a religious pilgrimage by any stretch of the imagination. It is a pilgrimage which uh, is secular in nature. Secular does not mean in the sense that we use the term, as in respecting all religion, etc. That's a different idea of secular. Secular meaning in a sense of a non-religious nature. Okay. Uh, in a sense, there is no religious or Christian uh, motive or idea which is driving this pilgrimage. Otherwise, what is a pilgrimage? That you go on something again. It all there is one commonality between the chivalric romance, the medieval romance, and the pilgrimage, and that is the journey. If the chivalric romance or the knight who ventures on an adventurous journey encounters all sorts of quote unquote happening things, battles, women, so on and so forth, and also enchanted castles and etc. In a pilgrimage, remember John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress is another prototype of that idea. In a pilgrimage, you would overcome. That is where the sin part comes in. I mean, in a sense, you would overcome various temptations along the way and come to a more solid, a morally strong realization of the self and the self's relationship with God, with your religious belief. Okay, so if you go on a pilgrimage, it should make you a good Christian. All right, that is in the Western Christian worldview. If you go on a nightly adventurous journey, or a romance kind of a journey, the knight would be prepared by virtue of having encountered various obstacles, temptations, adventures, battles, to fulfill the function of a knight in a feudal chivalric society. Okay, it educates him for his role, the knight's role, and in a pilgrimage, it in a sense gives you an education of who you are, in a sense, or in a theological religious sense. So he's in a sense playing around with both these ideas, condensing them both, and talking about something which in a sense is unique in romantic poetry. That is, he's talking about the current historical times that he is a part of. So as a note would tell you, the first two pilgrimages, the first two cantos of the pilgrimage are slightly of a different nature. We need not go into much detail of that. The third and the fourth, which we have in our syllabus, that too not in whole, we have only excerpts from them. Uh, there again, what is relevant to our syllabus and our concerns here of this paper is that again, what I was saying was that is Childe Harold's pilgrimage is unique, especially the part that we have in the paper, for the prime reason that it is engaging with large scale, momentous events of history, European history. Uh, the aftermath of the French Revolution, which sees the rise of Napoleon. Okay, the Napoleonic Wars, and this is the historical backdrop, and this is also the landscape of the journey here. And Byron himself went on a tour of the continent. Uh, okay, so that would be the landscape of the journeys: France, Spain, Italy, etc. The continental Europe, okay, which was ravaged by Napoleonic Wars, and it is written in the aftermath of that war. Okay, so Switzerland and Italy are the locales of third and fourth cantos, particularly that is locales of from where Byron was writing, uh, and uh, you would also come to see in these cantos this relationship between the self exploration and the exploration of the ravages of history, the ravages of time, the ravages of human endeavors and achievement aims, and also its subsequent uh, decline and fall. Okay, so what, instead of it being a religious canvas, it becomes a historical canvas. That is one thing which is clear. So as in a pilgrimage, it would be a religious land that you would be journeying to. There would be an identifiable destination that you would be going to. Okay, Badrinath, Kedarnath, Makkah, Medina, uh, Jerusalem. Okay, there is one particular uh, destination. Here, what is the destination? There is no clear destination as such. The only destination, from what we find on reading the cantos, is that he comes to a realization of his self, a better understanding of the self and the self's relationship with the larger forces of the human world and the natural world. Okay, and as you can guess by virtue of it being a romantic poet, he would ultimately say that uh, the world of nature, the canvas of nature, is too vast for the human endeavors to scale, conquer, possess for an indefinite period of time. Okay, so human actions cannot bring about an un uh, uh, an unchanging and unchangeable, or a definitive uh, change and control over time, history, the force of history. Okay, um, and the forces of nature, both the things that which are central to our study of Byron. And where is the human self uh, placed in this, on this canvas? The human self, and in this case the self of the journeying self, the self which is undertaking is this journey, this pilgrimage, comes to a realization of the fact that it is the human, if the human imagination can come to this realization of its own limitations, and its own limitations vis-a-vis permanent actions on earth in historical time, no matter how much the human self, be it the great Napoleon, attempts to conquer land and territory, ultimately he would be defeated. Remember Ozymandias, something of that sort. Uh, Also, what the pilgrim realizes is that the human self is also capable of renewing, as persistent self renewal. Okay, uh, the poet. If you read some of the essays given at the back, you will find, which I have also sent you, you would find that the poet also, in a sense, Byron repeatedly changes how he portrays uh, this journeying protagonist through the cantos, ultimately coming to a realization that there is no, in a sense, a definitive uh, category of the self. Okay, so Napoleon might be, we understand the figure of Napoleon as a great ruler, but that is only one side of Napoleon. In this poem, he would expose the other side of Napoleon as well, the fallible side, the vulnerable side. Okay, and how he fails in human sympathies, in his uh, mad uh, in his mad pursuit of absolute power and control. Okay, and how, in a sense, and the human self is not fixed. There are multiple sides to it, but more importantly, in with it, or rather with respect to the poet or the imaginative self itself goes or attempts to arrive at a final definitive uh, uh, or a final definition of itself. But as you know, that as you keep reassessing your own relationship with the self, with the outer world, it keeps changing, it keeps evolving. So it's almost like a protean self, just like uh, the Greek god Proteus, the the god of the oceans, which would change and assume different forms, the ever changing, permanent yet ever changing. So this is the kind of uh, realization that the poetic self, or the pilgrim of the poet Childe Harold uh, arrives at. The limitations of human endeavors in historical pursuits, the limitation of larger human pursuits and history, that is history of man, history or human history, in the face of cycles of nature which overturn historical uh, endeavors. And also thirdly, that the human better that you arrive at a better understanding of the human self through these constant renewals, revisions, as you encounter the outside, process it inside through the imagination, and come to realize that the self is ever changing. Okay, and this is a knowledge which the self gains through its ultimate encounter with nature. Okay, so in this poems, these two excerpts from Canto 3 and 4, you would also find a shade of the Byronic hero. This is not the Byronic hero per se in toto, because I mean Byronic hero has various mutations, and you'll find a different version of it in the first two cantos, different in the third and the fourth, and also in Don Juan, Manfred, and other works of Lord Byron. But there is this one, uh, there are these, or say one or two crucial aspects of the Byronic hero which you will find here. One is this constant struggle of the Byronic hero to define or come to terms with his own self, the frustrations of the self, the constant emotional upheaval, this constant uh, zeal and desire to know more and more, and in the quest, in the pilgrimage, in this medieval romance journey. Not, this is not exactly a medieval romance, okay, this journey to come to a realization as to there is no absolute final uh, understanding of the self, or there is no final truth with a capital T that the human self can hold on to and be absolutely certain about this is it, etc. So this knowledge of the limitation of human understanding, the knowledge of the limitation of human pursuits in history, uh, and the knowledge that it is this uh, give and take, it is this exchange with the human self is capable of making through the imagination with nature, is what is the reward of this journey, the ultimate uh, knowledge which the Byronic hero also arrives at. How does he arrive at it? Again, first thing is he is venturing out on this long journey. It's a long exploration. The, the spatial landscape might be continental Europe. The temporal landscape might be the period ensuing or following the Napoleonic Wars. Uh, but the philosophical and the intellectual landscape is the mind of the poet and the mind of the self. Okay. So this is going on to this pursuit is one thing. The other is then you go on to a journey. So what is the process of arriving at this understanding? As I've said, this imagination is one. Sympathy is one, which we have again talked about. Sympathy, the lack or the failure of sympathy becomes a crucial reason for the downfall of Napoleon, which we'll find in this uh, excerpt. All right. So, an exercise of sympathy is how through is the means or the mode, the journey, a sympathetic engagement with what you encounter on the journey, and this ability to be open to constant uh, impulses from outside, stimuli from outside, and contemplating how they react on your mind, on the relationship between the human and the historical, the natural, the philosophical. Okay, constant reflection. So this is you'll find as the mode of gaining the knowledge of the self in these these. This is almost in that epic kind of a tradition, uh, and also keep in mind that Byron's poetry or the narrative, not Byron's poetry, but say, let's say, Childe Harold, Canto 3 and 4, uh, they also don't miss the pun on Harold, the name Childe Harold, and uh, uh, the historical lineage of the British identity, which he is pointing out there in the note, plus also the idea of herald, Herald, heralding a new or heralding something, or in a sense welcoming, or not really welcoming, but uh, um, a signal which prophesizes a change or coming on of something momentous. That's a herald. Okay. Uh, okay. Yeah. What I was saying was, do keep in mind that Byron's narrative in the poems propels or goes forward by virtue of various contrasts which he paints. Okay, and as we go along, we'll take a closer look. I'll do a quick read of these poems, and there is not that much detail to, in a sense, explain in these. These are very mostly descriptive narrative pieces, few points here and there, which should give you a larger sense of what he is talking about. Okay, so Canto 3 begins in our syllabus here in the excerpt. There sung the greatest nor the worst of men, whose spirit antithetically mixed one moment of the mightiest, and again on little objects with like firmness fixed, extreme in all things. Okay. Uh, he's talking about Napoleon, as the note says, and this is after the fall of Napoleon. Talking about Napoleon, he says that there sung the greatest nor the worst of men. Okay, he was the greatest. Okay. And yet he sunk. He was not the worst, but yet he sunk. And whose spirit was antithetically mixed. It was mixed with opposites. One moment of the mightiest, on one moment the mightiest, and again on little objects with like firmness fixed. So Napoleon, he's talking about Napoleon, whose spirit, whose desire, in a sense, fixed one moment on what was mighty, conquering the world, and at the same time and with equal firmness fixed on little objects, small things, minute things, and hence extreme in all things. Okay. And then there is very an interesting formulation that he comes up with. Hadst thou been betwixt, had you been between, and not in either of the extremes, thy throne has still been thine or never been. In a sense, had you been in the middle, had you not gone to either of the extremes, either uh, you're still, your throne might still have been with you, were you not so extreme, or it might never have been. So, what is he saying, and he's encapsulating what he's saying in the very next line. For daring made thy rise as fall. Okay. Thou seekest even now to resume the imperial main and shake the world again, the thunder of the sea. In a sense, what he said is that had you not had Napoleon or had any adventurer or emperor for that matter not been in the extreme, had been content with the ordinary middle rung of life, either that emperor would have still kept his throne by virtue of his balance and equanimity, or he would not have achieved it in the first place, because probably that ambition is required to achieve that height. For daring made thy rise as fall. So this is the paradox here, that daring, that ambition made your rise as fall. Okay, basically meaning to say that whatever rises in pursuit of greatness, there is also in a sense a simultaneous force working against you which would eventually bring about your fall. It would be one reason in the case of Napoleon, it might be something else in the case of another. Okay. And he says, you seek even now to resume the imperial main, to function in an imperial fashion and shake the world again, the thunderer of the sea. So even now you think that you can stamp your authority on history, on continental Europe. Okay, so think about these contrast with which he is introduced. This stanza is introduced, or rather, this stanza introduces us to Byron, Childe Harold 3, and how he is painting this picture of the almost inevitability of ambition propelling you to great heights, and ultimately also entailing within the rise the fall. Uh, and he continues in the same vein in the next stanza, saying, conqueror and captive of the earth thou art. Conqueror in terms of the material earth that he's conquered. Captive also, in a sense, he's earthly. Whatever is material is limited, isn't it? Whatever is temporal, existing in normal human earthly time, which is called secular time, you are in a sense limited. She trembles at thee still, that is the earth, and thy wild name was never more bruited, that is spread, in men's mind than now, even after the fall of Napoleon. He is still in a sense popular feared. That thou art nothing, and thy wild name was never more bruited in men's mind than now, that thou art nothing, that is after the fall, save the jest of fame, except the jest, that is the joke, in a sense, of fame, who wooed thee once, thy vassal, and became the flatterer of thy fierceness, till thou wert a god unto thyself. Okay. So, in a sense, your word is spread across earth even now, that you have, even after you have fallen, the earth trembles. That is, the mortal human beings, different kingdoms, they tremble hearing your name of a great conqueror, even though he is defeated by now. Except the fame, except fame, which is and fame is spelled with a capital F, so it is not that fame, the larger idea of fame. So one, whoever is famous for a time being is ultimately forgotten, ultimately is subdued by, his personal fame is subdued by the larger power of fame. uh, who wooed thee once, fame was once in a sense tempted you, seduced you. Remember the medieval romance idea of tempting, seduction. pilgrimage. Again, the same idea. You have to overcome such hurdles. Whereas in a chivalric romance or a medieval romance, you are that being entangled with seduction, with being, in a sense, having, or rather flirting with seduction and temptation is a part of uh, uh, the adventure, quote unquote, of the knight, or the child who is to become a knight, qualified to become a knight. Whereas on a pilgrimage, uh, these temptations, in a sense, are tests which you don't have to give in to, and in a sense have to jump over. Save the jest of fame, who wooed thee once, thy vassal, that is a servant, and became the flatterer of thy fierceness. So, in a sense, it flattered the fact that you're popular. Your popularity, in a sense, flatters your fierceness. So everybody fears you if you are popular. Till thou wert a god unto thyself. So it wooed you, it was a servant to you, it became a flatterer of your fierceness till the point that you became a god unto yourself. Okay, it was all right till fame was overpowering or working or adding to the fierceness of Napoleon in the minds of the rest. But when fame got to his own head, that is, and he thought that he is God unto himself, that he can do anything, his own actions, his own quests have no other rules or moral limitations than what he decides them to be, because that is when you become a god unto yourself. You dictate as to what is right and wrong, what you can do and not do, what are your limits. Okay, so the fame was in his favor up till the point he became a god unto himself. Not less the same to the astounded kingdoms all inert, or more or less the same to the astounded kingdoms all inert, who deemed thee for a time whatever thou didst assert. So, in a sense, fame also had the same overpowering effect as it had on him. So it made him a god in his own eyes, but it also made him a powerful uh, uh, figure in the eyes of the kingdoms. And more or less, not less means more or less the same to the astounded kingdoms all inert. And in a sense, he is now saying that the fame also became inert or not powerful, not effective. To the astounded kingdoms, to the shocked kingdoms which Napoleon had once conquered, who deemed thee for a time whatever thou didst assert. In a sense, who obeyed. The fame, the power of Napoleon has now fallen flat in its effect on kingdoms which were once obeyed, deemed meaning obeyed, obeyed whatever command that Napoleon had for them. So it deserts, in a sense, fame has now deserted Napoleon after he became a god unto himself, and also the kingdoms are, in a sense, not so much in fear and awe. They would not obey all the commands of a fallen emperor. Okay, although he's yet popular, well known. The next stanza is a picture in the contrasting antithetical side of Napoleon, and by symbolically any emperor for that matter. He says, "Oh, more or less than man." He's either more or less than what is the average human, in high or low. Okay, so these are these pairs. Keep in mind. So the more on one side, high on one side, less and low on the other side. Battling with nations, that's a positive. Flying from the field, running away from the field, there he is low. Battling the nations, he's high. Flying from the field, he's low. Now making monarchs' necks thy footstool, something that in a sense you keep your foot on to climb up. Okay, making the necks of other monarchs like your footstool, again a tick mark for the emperor. But now more than thy meanest soldier taught to yield. Now taught to yield, to obey the commands, even more than what your meanest soldier would. Okay, there he's become low. He's become lower than his own soldiers he used to command. Uh, an empire thou could crush, command, and rebuild. An empire you could crush, command, and rebuild. So, a complete authority over land, empires. Again, a tick mark, more, high. But govern not thy pettiest passion, but unable to govern your most lowest, smallest of passions. Now, this is low. Okay. So you can make, in a sense, a list of these highs and lows, more and less, and you can put them in these brackets. Battling with nations, flying from the fields, now making monarchs next thy footstool, now more than the meanest soldier taught to yield, an empire thou couldst crush, command, and rebuild, but govern not thy pettiest passion, nor, however, deeply in men's spirits skilled. Okay. Not skill in knowing or understanding the spirits of men. Look through thine own, nor curb the lust of war. Or just a second. Nor, however, deeply in men. Just a second. Look at these two lines together. Nor, however, deeply in men's spirits skilled. Look through thine own, nor curb the lust of war, nor learn that tempted fate will leave the loftiest star. Basically saying that, but govern not thy pettiest passion, nor, however, deeply in men's spirit skilled, although you are highly skilled in understanding. So this is the right reading. However deeply you are in understanding, or however skilled you are understanding in the spirits of men. He's a commander of troops, so he would be in the know of how to motivate men. Okay, how to rouse them up. However, he fails to look through thine own. He fails to look through his own spirits. Okay. Nor curb the lust of war. He is unable to curb the lust of war in him. Okay. He does not know where to put a stop to his own spirits. Nor learn that tempted fate will leave the loftiest star. Okay. And he does not really learn the lesson that tempted fate will leave the loftiest star. When you tempt your fate, meaning that when you push your luck a little too hard or a little too further, in a sense, you won a lottery, you waged a battle, you have won it. But then power is addictive in a sense. So you venture for more power, more pursuits, more battles, and then the fate, tempted a little too far, decides to leave him. It will leave the loftiest star. All right. So in this stanza, you'll find this contrast between these extremes of Napoleon's qualities and his negative traits. And by extension, these are also the traits and qualities of any human being pursuing something or the other. Okay. Coming on to the next stanza, you'd find a list of positives in which positive terms in which he describes Napoleon. He says, "Yet well thy soul hath brooked, tolerated the turning tide, the turning of the fortune against him." So in a sense, he braves it strongly with that untaught innate philosophy which he has. That is philosophy, meaning looking at things in the larger scheme of things. Okay. uh, or stoically, to put it differently, which, be it wisdom, coldness, or deep pride, is a gall and wormwood to an enemy. Okay, this turning of the tide against you, defeat for an enemy, is a gall and wormwood. It is a phrase, an expression used to talk about, to express sorrow, bitter grief, or a source of bitterness, a source of bitterness and grief. Okay, so it's either wisdom, which teaches him to take defeat or the turning of the fortune uh, in a valiant manner, or is it coldness, uh, that is, as he's not uh, in a sense, coldness and deep pride, basically not wanting to show how devastated he is, like a general putting up a brave face. Whatever is it, he's bared it bravely, according to this stanza. When the whole host of hatred stood hard by to watch and mock thee shrinking, thou hast smiled with a sedate and all enduring eye. And everybody was mocking him, he takes it calmly, sedately, not getting affected or agitated by it. When fortune fled her spoilt and favourite child, he stood unbowed beneath the ills upon him piled. Okay, so ill fate is what he is bearing valiantly. The next stanza is more of the negatives of Napoleon. He says, wiser, sager meaning wiser than in thy fortunes. You're wiser now in your defeat than in your fortunes. For in them, when he was more fortunate, ambition stealed thee on too far. Ambition had pushed you too far when you were in fortune. Now, misfortune has given him a lesson, made him wiser. That's the first half of the line. Ambition stealed thee on too far to show that just habitual scorn which could contempt men and their thoughts. Uh, in a way, he's saying that ambition had pushed you too far ahead, that too far to show, basically it pushed you so far that you could not see that just habitual scorn, that looking at people with scorn, which would treat with disdain and contempt men and their thoughts. Basically, he did not know when to, in a sense, pull back his scorn, his wrath, and in a sense, condescension, his anger. Uh, Before it could, he did not know when to. Ambition has pushed him so far on that he did not know where to put a brake on his scorn. Instead, he kept on treating his men with and their thoughts with contempt. Okay, now that's not a very good thing to do for an emperor or a leader of an army. It was wise to feel, not so to wear it ever on thy lip and brow. So even if you had scorn, contempt, and disdain within you, which emperors, generals can. So it's a very cunning sort of a phrase that Byron has put in. It was wise to feel that way, but not to wear it ever on the lip and brow. But you should not have spoken that out aloud on your lips, through your lips, or put that on your face, your countenance, your demeanor. Okay. For example, if there is a leader of a team or an army, mostly an army, take this more specific example, even if you, in a sense, think that the men you command or the women you command are, in a sense, beneath in rank to you and are at the beck and call of your orders, uh, you should not show them your contempt and disdain and scorn to them. Instead, you should give them importance, in a sense that any army officer would tell you how important are the troops. to wear it ever on the lip and brow, and spurn the instruments thou wert to use. And spurn, in a sense, treat with disdain, contempt again. To wear the disdain and contempt on your lip and brow, on your face, and spurn the men, the instruments thou wert to use. The troops, his own people, helping him in battle, his juniors, his subordinate staff, they were the instruments of his rise. He could not have won the wars alone. Okay, that it was unwise to wear the disdain on your lip and your brow, and spurn the very instruments you were to use, till they were turned unto thine overthrow. Okay, so by the time, I mean, you kept on treating them with contempt and disdain. So this is the abuse of power which Byron is pointing to. The abuse of power by the authoritarian emperor, leader, who uses, this is a very Machiavellian word, instruments, that you use situations, people, ideas as instruments, and you throw them away after your target and objective is achieved. Okay, so he says that you treated them thus, and by that time it was too late, and they were then turned into your own overthrow. So in a sense, you were overthrown by the very same people you used as instruments to rise, because you treated them with contempt and disdain. It is but a worthless world to win or lose. So hath it proved to thee, and all such lot who choose. Okay. In the first two stanzas, or in this stanzas up till this point, and the previous couple of stanzas, you would find that Byron is ascribing the rise and fall of Napoleon to his own actions, his own calculations and miscalculations. But he, in the last two lines, in a sense, he makes a more general statement about the kind of lesson that you deduce from the rise and fall of Napoleon. It is but a worthless world to win or lose. So hath it proved to thee, and all such lot who choose. So basically, all those who choose to venture on this expedition for power, for imperial domination, ultimately they would lose this. Okay, and in a sense, also the note number 8, the agency which is given to Napoleon to man, is snatched in the following stanza, where a large social process is pointed to in the paving of Napoleon's throne, basically talking about Napoleon himself, in a sense, was not the sole agent of his own power and rise and fall. There are a lot of other historical factors playing along. Of course, there is his own wrongs and positives which are pointed at. But however, he is almost given as a small agent in the world historical process. So you can use this phrase, the world historical process, in a sense, situations arising or happening which throw up a leader, or conditions in which a leader emerges, and conditions changing partly. Of course, the leader also has a role to play in all of that, but not complete agency. And then ultimately the decline and the fall. Okay, and in the next stanza, he goes on to expound upon what led to the fall of Napoleon. He says, if like a tower upon a headlong rock thou hadst been made to stand or fall alone, such scorn of men had helped to brave the shock. Basically saying that, were you standing on, or were you like a tower upon a high rock with nobody else around? Basically, you were the sole figure at the top, uh, there without any aid of anybody else. Your fall or the scorn of the people would have helped you brave the shock, because you would have felt that they are, in a sense, uh, jealous. I mean, sour grape kind of things. So they're mocking them because they are envious. They're jealous because they couldn't rise to the top, and now they're rejoicing your fall. So the scorn of men would have been more bearable. Okay, that's what he's saying. But he says, but men's thoughts were the steps which paved thy throne. Their admiration thy best weapon shone. But you were not there up like a tower on a rock alone. You had risen up on the thoughts of men. Uh, why just thoughts of men? I mean, I would have asked you, any idea? Uh, well, for any emperor or any ruler to come to power and rise, you need to conquer the minds of men, public opinion. Uh, the men of, specifically in Napoleon's case, the minds of your troops, the army that you're leading into battle. Whoever is, in a sense, uh, your aid, your help, your uh, commander in the battle. Okay, if you are the general, you need to, in a sense, conquer the thoughts, the mind of men, and on a larger even in a democratic election or leadership, you what do you need to win? Public opinion. Okay, so he's saying, but uh, you did not rise up alone. Uh, you had risen up because men's thoughts were the steps which paved thy throne. You rose up to your throne, uh, climbing on the thoughts of men. Their admiration, thy best weapon shone. They admired you, and that was basically your best weapon, that they admired you, and or they added the luster. Their admiration added the luster to your all the weapons and powers that you had. The part of Philip's son was thine. That is, you were, in a sense, destined to play, or rather, you were well placed to play the role of Alexander the Great. Um, that's the kind of role you should have played. Not then like stern Diogenes to mock at men. Now the note tells you Diogenes is a philosopher. What do philosophers do? Philosophers are, by definition or by virtue of how they function, critics. So they would be always criticizing the society, the people inhabiting their country, their city, their uh, the times in which you live in, the contemporary times. You'll find uh, any philosophical text, works, ideas. It's a criticism of contemporary times and ideas. Okay. Now he's saying that this is not the part that you should have played. You should not have been uh, like a philosopher, Diogenes, treating your own people with contempt and disdain and criticism and scorn. Instead, your part was that of Alexander. That is the part you ought to have played. You chose to play the wrong part. Okay. For sceptered cynics, earth were far too wide a den. Okay. Now look at this note given after this line, which is very important. It points out exactly to what I was saying, how Napoleon, in a sense, mistreated the opinion and the stature of his own men. The great error, this is Byron's own note, so particularly pay attention. The great error of Napoleon, if he have writ our annals true, was a continued obtrusion on mankind of his want of all community of feeling. Like the philosopher, want of feeling, lack of feeling. He did not want human interaction was a continued obtrusion on mankind of his want of all community of feeling for or with them. So, in a sense, he, as a figure, chooses to remain isolated, not feel with and for his men. A philosopher can do that. In fact, a philosopher is usually an isolated, skeptic cynic who takes a distant view from society. Okay. Perhaps more offensive to human vanity than the active cruelty of more trembling and suspicious tyranny. So, what is more cruel for humanity? In a sense, again, you will find that a very uh, funny and limited version of it amongst your own peers, family members, relative, कि वो अपने में रहता है, वो हमसे बात नहीं करता या करती. Okay, he or she is too high-headed, studying all literature and poetry, romanticism, and least bothered to come and uh, talk to us, mingle with us, and just gossip and waste time. So these are actually things on which people make public. I mean, they make a strong opinion about your personality, and then in a sense, that's the thing that like the least in a sense in a person, and they might be able to put up with some sort of tyranny, some misdemeanor of yours because at least you're engaged. You are not in a sense aloof. Generally, what happens is people feel that you, by virtue of being aloof, are more high headed, think more high of yourselves, and the others are not really worthy of your time and company. Um, so, this is a kind of accusation on a more large scale, in which happens when it happens in a autocratic, despotic system, which Napoleon is the head of, or it also happens in a democratic space that XYZ leader is unapproachable, is too aloof, too absent. Okay, so this is more offensive to human vanity than the active cruelty of more trembling and suspicious tyranny. Such were his speeches to public assemblies as well as individuals. And the single expression which he is said to have used on returning to Paris after the Russian winter had destroyed his army, such a catastrophe has happened, rubbing his hands over fire, Napoleon says, "This is pleasanter than Moscow, the fire of it, etc." This is pleasanter than Moscow, complete apathy, would probably alienate more favor from his cause than the destruction and reverses which led to the remark. So, more than the actual forces of battle, of military power, etc., causing damage to the army of Napoleon, what causes more damage to Napoleon's army? Napoleon himself, his own remarks, his own callousness, apathy vis-a-vis human feelings. He's not grateful to his soldiers. He's not concerned about his people. He's not genuinely concerned. He is. How can a leader, uh, make such a callous, unfeeling, even cruel remark after thousands of his men have been killed in a battle, saying that okay, Moscow too cold, Russia up north very cold, this fire is a lot better. Okay, very callous, stupid remark, in fact. So, what does it tell you? Byron, in a sense, is more well. One thing that makes him peculiar is that he gives importance to or talks about these off-handed, ordinary events this is a non-event. Nobody would talk about Napoleon warming his hands on a fire. No history book would tell you that. And uh, uh, completely ignoring the deaths that his troops have suffered. So it's an innocuous, seemingly unimportant, off-handed, casual sort of a remark made by a powerful figure, which becomes crucial in altering the larger course of history, the course of battle. Okay, usually you will think of some maneuver went wrong, some shortage of ammunition, some sudden change in climate, flood, snowfall, etc., which caused the defeat in the battle. You would not attribute a decisive loss in a battle to an offhanded, demoralizing remark such as this. But this is what is actually uh, a very key feature of Byron's take on uh, how the self, how the ordinary human, quote unquote, ordinary human actions, words, gestures, misdemeanors can have on large cataclysmic events in history. Okay, so do keep this point in mind, very, very crucial. Going back to the line again, for sceptered cynics, earth were too wide, far too wide a den. Sceptered cynics meaning it's a combination of sceptered meaning. Uh, Scepter is a rod which is carried by the king. Cynic is, of course, the philosopher. So, for such a uh, uh, antithetical personality, the sceptered cynic, earth were far too wide a den. Whereas for a sceptered king, the earth is his uh, region that he rules over, or uh, uh, earth is his home basically, were far too wide a den. So, earth is far too wide uh, to be like the den of the philosopher in which he can isolate himself. Okay, going on to the next. He says, Byron continues, expanding upon that scene of or the situation between Napoleon and his troops. But quiet or silence to quick bosoms is a hell. But quiet, that is silence, to alive hearts is a hell. And there has been thy bane, that has been the curse for Napoleon. He doesn't talk to them about things, apart from giving such condescending, apathetic remarks. There is a fire and motion of the soul which will not dwell in its own narrow being, but aspire and beyond the fitting medium of desire. Okay, so he treats his troops as confined beings, so would only follow the orders and almost as instruments, that is the word used. He doesn't recognize them as living hearts in which there burns a fire which gives motion to the soul and which will not dwell, be satisfied with its own narrow being, but aspire for something more than the your confined bodily form or your confined stature and role. This also holds true for Napoleon himself and for every human being. And but once kindled, once lighted that fire, quenchless evermore. Once it is lighted, it is even becomes even more uh, hungry. Preys upon high adventure, nor can tire of anything but rest. The only thing that can tire a living mind, soul, is boredom, being tired of your own uh, uh, lack of movement, the own rest. I mean, who better would understand this than most of us who are confined and have ample amount of rest but are mostly restless these days, lockdown. A fever at the core, fatal to him who bears, to all who ever bore. Okay, in a sense that that burning desire for adventure, for going out, for seeking more and more, is like a fever at the very core of your being, which is fatal to him who bears. Now, there is a pun there. Fatal to him who bears. It is fatal for the person who has that fever at the core. Napoleon is a case in point. Also, fever at the core, fatal to him who bears, who tolerates and does not give vent to that desire and ambition. So, in either way, you are, in a sense, doomed. So, that is the paradox with which Byron is working in this Canto 3 of Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. So, it's a fever at the core to explore more, to uh, seek more, gain more, desire more, and it is fatal to him who bears, that is, who contains this fever, and also fatal to him, you can read it that way, fatal to him who tolerates it, does not seek, okay, keeps bearing. To all who ever bore, to all who ever bore this fever within them, to all who ever got bored. So this is these are the two ways in which you can read. The from talking about Napoleon per se, his soldiers, and coming to this general desire for human beings to seek more, to be up and about, and uh, conquer this boredom and sense of stagnation. He goes on to talk about something very interesting and in very interesting terms in the next stanza. Now, this begins in continuation with the previous one, where he says, I'll read a couple of lines from the previous. A fever at the core, fatal to him who bears, to all who ever bore, the sense of restless, wanting, yearning for more. This makes the madmen who have made men mad by their contagion. In a sense, this desire for ever seeking more, being dissatisfied with the ordinary, okay, with the boring, ordinary life, this seeking creates madmen who then make men mad by their contagion. It's like a virus which spreads. Okay. And who are these madmen? Conquerors and kings, founders of sects and systems of thought and philosophy, to whom you can add sophists, kind of philosophers, bards, poets, statesmen, leaders of states. Okay. These are all madmen that he is referring to. All unquiet things. It could be any unquiet idea, money, it could be power, it could be lust, it could be any romantic ideal, anything, absolutely, which we attach this crazy importance to. Okay. This makes the madmen who have made men mad by their contagion, conquerors, kings, founders of sex systems, to whom add sophists, bards, statesmen, all unquiet things which stir too strongly the soul's secret springs. Conquerors do that for their soldiers, to their troops, and kings also, and to their subjects. Founders of sects do this to their religious followers. followers of various sects, how fanatical all of them get in seeking something great out there. For the conquerors and kings, it could be land, territory, power. For sects and systems of thought, it could be different ways of life, different ways of attaining quote unquote God, immortality, whatever. To whom you can add sophists, philosophers give their own sense of what is life. Okay. Poets, statesmen, etc., all give you different quote unquote grand ideals which you pursue, which in a sense give you an antidote or give you that intoxicant to come out of this ordinary day to day existence and boredom. All unquiet things, anything else. Okay, technology can be one of them. Which stir too strongly the soul's secret springs. So all of these madmen and mad things, quote unquote, quoted above, what do? They stir the secret strings of your soul, and then making you mad. Okay, spreading their contagion. I have an idea, religious, imperial, technological, whatever, and it spreads like a contagion, and everybody is crazy for it. Just what to, in a sense, live a less bored, more adventurous existence. He says, and these are themselves the fool to those they fool. Why does he say that? The fools to those they fool. What is the job of the fool? The job of the fool in a court to the king is to amuse the king. Okay, it's also to criticize the king, also in a sense to amuse the king. Not themselves the fools to those they fool. Okay. I mean, you might think that as a king, that the fool is only fooling around, but is also taking the mickey out of you, making fun out of you through his criticisms. Okay. So these madmen, these conquerors, kings, sophists, bards, etc., they're almost like that fool jester figure in a court, a clown almost, entertaining you, criticizing you. But the important thing is the king usually misses the point of criticism by the fool. Okay, and built into the words or the jesting of the fool is the praise of the king. That's why the king misses out on the critical part and becomes a megalomaniac, brings things too highly of himself and gets entertained by the fool and takes it very lightly. Okay, so these are like the fools to those they are actually fooling, that is the followers of these various sects and ideas. Envied, all these great powerful men, poets, philosophers, kings, they are all envied, but yet they're very unenviable. What stings are theirs? Okay. One breast laid open were a school which would unteach mankind the lust to shine or rule. Basically saying that you have to just examine one breast, that is one heart or one true inner nature of any one man, woman, humankind, and study it thoroughly. You would find that it would be like a school which would teach the entire mankind not to shine and rule. Okay. In the sense that if you open one breast of any emperor, not any humankind, if you open one breast of any powerful king, philosopher, poet, etc., and study it thoroughly, you would find that there is a lot in there. You would come to know how the human mind, in a sense, operates, functions, how power functions, how religious philosophies are fashioned, they function, and how, in a sense, you would be able to see how uh, detrimental all of these grand ideas are for human fulfillment and peace. Nothing of this is going to give you that, and it would teach the whole of mankind not to forget, or rather to forget about this lust to shine and rule. So, what is this entire poem about up till now? It's primarily about ordinary life, ordinariness. Okay, the triumph of ordinariness, the triumph of the basic human qualities, uh, in contrast to the ultimate fall of anything which is grand and great, supposedly. Okay, and he goes on to talk more. Says that those people, like most of us, especially the great, who are fired with this great pursuit of something ideal, something grand. Their breath is agitation. Their breathing is almost like agitation, huffing and puffing, and their life a storm whereon they ride to sink at last, and yet so nursed and bigoted to strive. So, in a sense, they are strife. In a sense, is like a nurse to them, but they're also bigoted to it. So, in a sense, unfaithful to strife. That should their days, surviving perils past, melt to calm twilight. That if these people are such that if their days, if they survive the earlier perils, were come to, or if these people were come to live a calm, quiet light, melt to calm twilight, calm life, they feel overcast with sorrow and supineness, and so die. So they are neither faithful to strife, they are neither respecting of strife because they are bigoted. However, they are nursed on strife. Uh, Strife, in a sense, takes them forward. But if they come to live a dull, mundane, calm existence where nothing is quote unquote happening, all is mundane and boring, melt to calm twilight, they feel overcast. They feel as if clouds have gathered over their head and it's all gloomy. Feel overcast with sorrow and supineness, lack of mobility, just lying languid, and so die. So they are mostly killed by what? Boredom. Even as a flame unfed, just like an unfed flame, which runs to waste with its own flickering. Or a sword laid by, unused sword, which eats into itself and rusts ingloriously. Okay, this is one thing that he says that human beings, especially those aspiring for greatness, cannot really bear. They would be consumed by their own rusting. They would be consumed by that flickering candle, which is really of no use, even in. This. So basically, you don't really have an option. You have to seek adventure, and yet, in a sense, rise and fall along with it. Because even if you don't do anything, as most of us are doing right now, we age, rust, and decay out of boredom. And he ends it with this stanza: He who ascends to mountain tops shall find the loftiest peaks most wrapped in clouds and snow. Those who ascend to the mountain tops, they will find the loftiest peaks, the highest of peaks, are wrapped with clouds and snow. What is the picture here of loneliness, isolation, and also no life? Snow means no natural habitation, no life. He who surpasses or subdues mankind must look down on the hate of those below. So, anybody who goes to the top, and since the world is such that you rise to the top by stepping onto the shoulders of others, as was the case with Napoleon. Uh, and when you come to the top, in a sense, when you look down, you'll see the hate of people who are below you, beneath you. Though high above the sun of glory glow, and far beneath the earth and ocean spread, round him are icy rocks, one at the mountain top, highest of the peak. He sees the glory of the sun. Below he can see widespread earth and ocean. So the entire world is at his feet basically, and his head is crowned with the sun, the glory of the sun. But yet around him are icy rocks. Icy rocks are lifeless, useless. So what you will do if you go and reach a high peak mountain top where there is no life, no vegetation, only snow, there is nothing really to do. And loudly blow contending tempests on his naked head, while strong breeze blowing at the top, and thus reward the toils which to those summits led. And thus that person would be rewarded. Okay, so again, I mean, this is not a literal, the literal image is there for description. You need to read it in the larger scheme of human pursuit, ambition, the inevitability of the fall along with the rise, the usual course of manipulation which comes along your rise to the top, especially if you take the case of Napoleon, how he scorns his own men, how unsympathetic he is to them. So this is, especially Canto 3 is more about this, the almost the fruitlessness of great historical, philosophical, religious pilgrimages, pursuits, journeys of the night. If you think that you are going to reach a destination, ultimately that would be all glory. So here he does not reach the dead mountain top. And what actually makes this journey made by this poet persona in this Canto 3 fruitful is whatever he gains about all these great ventures of mankind, their subsequent failures, experiences, and how in a sense greatness in a sense isolates you, or in Napoleon's case, how in a sense unsympathetic isolation brings you down, and how Napoleon also becomes an emblem, a kind of symbol of the ultimate fall of any human endeavor. Okay, so this is how he makes the historical continental landscape a landscape about human pursuits, the pursuits of the human subject, in a sense, what is worthwhile for human beings, and how, in a sense, almost impossible human beings find it to come out of this paradox of pursuing a great ambitious goal, because you want to, all of us would want to, and and the boredom of, in a sense, staying stagnant and not going for that great ambitious pursuit, idea, or goal. So this is the paradox, tormenting paradox in which the Byronic hero is caught up in. Napoleon is also a perverted version of that same stereotype. Okay, a good version of that would be perhaps Rousseau. We'll talk more about it perhaps in the next canto. Forget about all the criticisms of Rousseau for the time being, or basically taking up his ideas on nature. So keep this in mind: history, nature, the human self, and the larger humanity, ambition, greatness, and boredom, ordinariness. So these are the paradoxes along which this canto is set, and I hope you like this one. Slightly easier to read. I thought I would take less time, but uh, it was. I mean, it touched upon quite a lot of things and quite a long piece. So go through it and please watch all the videos, lectures, and send me your problems. All right, and I'll upload another lecture for the next canto pretty soon. Okay, thanks and take care.